Can we talk about your specific, like you want to say that you want to say that psychophysical laws are
Finely tuned.
right? You want to say that their continued operation the same way is going to be confirmation of your hypothesis?
Yes.
See, the reason I don't think is because that is the very thing to be explained. So building that into your hypothesis, if we take it back to the analogy with the refrigerator door, like what if I said that, what if someone hypothesized that the light was burnt out, and I instead hypothesized that something was covering the light, and then you say, well, if we continue to open it, that'll be evidence that the light is burned out. And the person who hypothesized that there was merely something covering the light that was obscuring it, that's why the refrigerator appeared dark. That's also going to be confirmation of their hypothesis over and
Right, but
over again. So the idea is that it's not a novel prediction. So you're going to have to generate something new that's not already a candidate for explanation, right?
mm, no. Okay. So you're saying that because the fine tuning itself is what is being explained, that a continued observance of the fine tuning itself wouldn't be confirmation. However, the difference between this kind of fine tuning and the fine tuning of something like the universe or the basic physical laws of the universe is because it is continual. That you could explain with chance, that you could explain by chance that maybe with some kind of multiverse explanation or whatever, that you could raise the probability that a life that was intelligible, there will be an infinite number of universes with intelligible human experiences, even experiences exactly like the ones you've had up to this moment. But there's a vastly higher probability that would diverge at the very next moment than for it to continue. And so when it continues, it's a confirmation of a design that they're finely tuned by design and not by chance. Because if it was by chance, then it would be more likely to diverge at the next moment.
I guess I'm confused about this idea of confirmation, right? Because you don't seem to think confirmation means a prediction coming true.
No, it would be a prediction.
So you think the hypothesis does predict something?
Yeah, the prediction is.
So wait a minute. Yeah. Show me how a design hypothesis predicts something. That's what I've been trying to get you to do from the outset.
Yeah, it would predict a continuation, like an intelligibility.
We went over that before, right? That it's possible for a designer to desire intelligibility and to desire unintelligibility and to contrive to produce it.
Okay.
So right, it doesn't actually predict intelligibility.
Right, but chance itself predicts.
Wait. Forget about chance. We're not talking about chance right now. We're talking about your hypothesis, which is the design hypothesis, right?
Right. And I'm going to say it again.
Okay.
I'm going to start one more time, and then you're going to interrupt again, right?
No, I'm not going to interrupt. What I'm going to do is what I did the last time, which is point out that you aren't answering my question. So I'm going to let you go, and then when I've noticed you haven't answered my question, I'm going to repeat it. So go ahead.
Okay, so on chance, there is a higher probability, an extremely high probability that it will diverge rather than continue on as I expect. On the design, or the hypothesis that the universe itself is guided towards some kind of outcome, a favorable outcome to human experiences in general. On that hypothesis, it would continue as I expect it to. It wouldn't be necessitated. In fact, I know that it doesn't happen all the time because I am fallible. But on that hypothesis, I have an expectation generally that my experiences will be intelligible. On chance, I have the polar opposite expectation that it will be unintelligible rather than intelligible.
Okay. So again, my question wasn't answered. So we agree.
I don't care. I literally don't care.
Okay. But we're trying to evaluate your claim, right?
Right, so, but what you're doing is I'm giving you a claim. I'm giving you a reason that I make my inference, and then you're going back to questions about what constitutes evidence or whatever. Why can't you just address the argument?
You were saying I am addressing the argument. You claimed that it was confirmation, right? The fact that we saw intelligibility was confirmation, and I asked you if you understood confirmation to be a prediction of the hypothesis coming true, and you agreed.
Sure.
And so then I asked you how the design hypothesis predicts things, right?
Right.
And you said, well, it predicts intelligibility. And I pointed out that it doesn't actually predict that, because there could be a designer who desires unintelligibility, right, and has the capacity to contrive to secure unintelligibility. So the design hypothesis, right, neither predicts intelligibility nor unintelligibility. In fact, it predicts nothing at all, right? And yet you were saying that confirmation, right, is what's predicted on a hypothesis coming true. But if you have agreed that your hypothesis doesn't actually predict anything, it can't actually be confirmed. And you're saying I'm not addressing your argument, right? Now, so let's get agreement on these points, okay?
Let's grant for the sake of argument. Let's say that we even thought that on design that the probability of intelligibility is actually low. Let's say we even went that far.
It's not. There's no probability at all on the design.
Right. Let's say that it was. Let's say it was even actually a low probability of intelligibility on design. It would actually still be a superior explanation.
That's a different issue. We can address that when we get to that.
Right,
okay?
but listen,
you're getting ahead of yourself.
You don't get to make an inference in a vacuum when there's nothing that we actually have.
None of that is relevant to what I'm trying to deal with right now.
Right,
okay?
I know, because you won't allow me to make a claim that is a relative superiority claim.
We will get to that point. We will get to that point in time. Before we do that, we have to secure agreement on the steps that lead up to it, right? So you said, okay, that your hypothesis would be confirmed,
yes,
right, by the continued presence of intelligibility, right? Now, I asked you, is confirmation what's predicted on a hypothesis coming true? Is confirmation of a hypothesis that what's predicted on a hypothesis is coming true? Okay, and you agreed that it was. Now, are you retracting that? Or could you continue to agree that that's what confirmation of a hypothesis is?
No, I'll agree to it.
Okay, so in order for your hypothesis to be confirmed, what it predicts would have to come true. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay. What does the design hypothesis predict?
I'll call the hypothesis that the universe was designed for favorable outcomes.
That's not the question that I asked you. I asked you, what does the design hypothesis predict?
Right, that's my hypothesis.
No. The design hypothesis is that there is a being that exists that has beliefs and desires and has the capacity to realize them. That's what the design hypothesis is.
No, my hypothesis is that the universe is designed in such a way that's favorable to.
Okay, that's a different hypothesis. That's not the design hypothesis. That's a specific
it is. It
design
entails
hypothesis.
design. It is a design
You're
argument.
right. It does entail design. It is a design argument if there's an argument there. It's not actually the design hypothesis, right? The design hypothesis is that there is a designer, right?
Okay.
If you plug in specific motivations and desires, right, into your design hypothesis, then you've got a specific design hypothesis, right? So you can say, if there's a designer that has the desire to produce universes in which there's cheese, right, and he has the capacity to produce such universes, and he doesn't have stronger competing desires, and he's a rational being, right?
Sure.
Then if we observe cheese, that would be confirmation of the hypothesis, right? But that's not the design hypothesis itself, right? The design hypothesis itself is merely that there is a being that has beliefs and desires and has the capacity to realize them, right? Mm-hmm. He can create universes of any kind, right? He could choose not to create at all, right? Now, we would agree that that hypothesis doesn't generate any predictive expectations, right?
While, let's say that a hypothesis has a low prior probability of a particular observation, it doesn't follow from a low or relatively low or even 50-50, whatever prior probability of a given observation, that a given observation wouldn't itself lead to a higher probability of that theory hypothesis being true in light of some observation.
I don't understand why you aren't answering the question that I asked you.
Right.
I asked
Well,
you
that
whether
is an
you
answer.
agreed,
What you're saying is,
that the
I'm
design
addressing.
hypothesis, the design hypothesis simplicator, right? The design hypothesis simplicator predicts anything. That's all that I'm asking you. Does it predict anything or not?
I think it could predict something broadly, or even it wouldn't have to. It could be a complete 50-50 thing on design, whether or not human lives are intelligible.
Just show me how the design hypothesis simplicator predicts something. I'm not understanding it. It seems to me that the design hypothesis, right, which is the bare idea of an agent, right, who has capacity to act, has beliefs and desires, right? But we're not plugging in any specific beliefs or desires to that agent, right? It seems to me that an agent might desire to create any kind of thing. He might desire intelligent life, unintelligent life, no life at all, complex life, specified complex life, unspecified complex life, reducibly complex life. He might desire universes or no universes. He might desire intelligibility or unintelligibility. He might desire finely tuned psychophysical laws or unfinely tuned, coarsely tuned psychophysical laws, right? Now, I'm simply asking you whether you agree that the design hypothesis simplicator doesn't predict anything. If you disagree, tell me what it predicts and show me logically how you derive that prediction from the mere fact of a designer. That's what I'm asking you.
It may not predict very specific outcomes like that, one way or the other.
What outcomes does it predict?
What it would be, it would nonetheless be a favorable explanation if the
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you what. I'm not asking you what it would be. Let me finish the sentence.
Okay,
and then again, I'm going to ask you the same question. So go ahead.
Okay, so when you look at something like Bayes' theorem, what you have is the probability of a hypothesis being true is the prior probability of the hypothesis times the probability of the, I can't remember, but it deals with the prior probability of the hypothesis, and you divide by the prior probability of the evidence. And so just because it has a low prior probability or even a 50-50 prior probability, it wouldn't follow that the probability of the hypothesis can't be raised by something with a high probability of the hypothesis given a piece of evidence. So what you're saying is that what you're arguing about is the prior probability. You're saying that the prior probability of intelligibility on design isn't particularly high. Maybe it's even low, because a designer could design any kind of universe or whatever, right? But it wouldn't follow, therefore, that the probability is therefore low itself if the probability of the hypothesis given a piece of evidence, such as intelligibility, when it would otherwise be inexplicable or even unexpected, that would actually raise the probability of the hypothesis being true.
Except that wasn't the question that I asked you.
I don't care. I'm explaining the argument.
Okay,
you're just being pedantic.
I'm being pedantic. Okay, so let me ask the other people in the room, right? Do you understand why I'm asking Aaron the question that I'm asking him? Or do you think that what I'm asking him is irrelevant to criticizing his putative argument?
Yeah, I don't see how he could appeal to probability, right? If on the God hypothesis, there's no evidence, there's nothing that can be expected on that hypothesis.
Exactly. And he seems to not be able to give a straight answer to the question, right, as to whether the design hypothesis simplicator, the bare version of the design hypothesis, actually predicts anything, right? Because it's a simple question, right? If there were a designer, expect to see, right? And then if we didn't expect to see it, right, if we did, I'm sorry, if we didn't see what we expected to see, we would then say that's evidence against the existence of a designer, right? So all I want is a specific outcome, a specific observation that if we saw it would be confirmation of the design hypothesis because it was expected on the design hypothesis, which is to say that it's predicted on the design hypothesis. And then if it's not actually encountered, oh, that is evidence against the design hypothesis because what was expected, which is to say predicted on the design hypothesis. Now, does that seem pedantic to you to ask for an answer to that question?
Yeah, no, because what that deals with, that's all related to prior probabilities.
What is the answer to the question? What is the answer to the question? Does the design hypothesis predict something, specific outcome, or not? If it does, what is it? And when you specify what it is, show me how, starting from the bare design hypothesis, you're able to generate that predictive expectation. That's my question.
Okay, when you come up with a design hypothesis, it's a design for a particular end. Okay, and my design hypothesis
I didn't ask you that.
The universe, right, I don't care. Listen, I'm going to state this. Okay, the design hypothesis is that the universe is designed taking into consideration human consciousness in some way, such that it's intelligible.
Okay.
That has to be, and the explanation for that would be theism, but the design hypothesis there is that, okay? And that's as an alternative to psychophysical laws being finely tuned by chance or some kind of physical necessity, which I don't think would work either, because I argued against that as well.
Was that an answer to my question?
I don't care what your questions are.
Well, I don't understand
I'm telling you what the argument is.
What you're doing. I don't understand what you're doing here if not to engage in a dialogue, right? You're trying to make an argument, right? I don't think anybody in this room has any idea how your argument is supposed to work, right? And if anybody would like to step up and see if they can reconstruct the inferential relations between the various claims and show how they aren't question begging, be my guest. Right? I don't think anybody's going to be able to do it. I don't think we have a clue as to how your argument is supposed to work, right? Well, so I'm trying to reconstruct it step by step, and I'm asking you specific questions, right? So we can gain clarity on each step, right? So we can figure out how or whether there could be an argument of the type that you have in mind.
Right.
Now,
but when you say,
each time I ask you a clarificatory question, right, in order to try to secure that understanding, you get upset at me, right, and refuse to answer the question, and then go on and repeat some stuff or say some new stuff, right, that isn't actually relevant to the question that I've answered, so that I have to repeat the question again. And then when I point out that you haven't answered the question, what you do is say, I don't care. Right? But I don't understand what you're doing here if you're not actually trying to engage in a dialogue. I'm trying to engage in a dialogue with you. I'm trying, right, to clarify your argument, right? And you are refusing to cooperate. I don't understand it, right? Why is it that you won't answer the question?
In order to be a scientific theory, intelligent design the rules of science, which means it needs to propose a hypothesis, which can be.
The question of whether it's scientific.
I'm not even saying anything. I'm not even saying anything about scientific, right? I'm just saying for there to be an inference, right, from some observation, which is taken to be evidence for some hypothesis, right? I'm just trying to understand how that could be done if it's not actually predicted by the hypothesis.
Do you know how the traditional fine-tuning argument works?
I don't think the traditional fine-tuning arguments work, right? And I don't think they work precisely because of this criticism that I'm trying to render to you, right? And I'm trying to get you to understand.
Right. Well, if I could just explain the reasoning that I take to be being used by the traditional one just for the sake of the audience and everyone else in the room. Even if they don't ultimately work, then we can get into that, okay? So the traditional fine-tuning argument says that the universe, the physical laws of the universe, the four major forces and different constants and quantities are finely tuned for life or for human life or for moral conscious agents and stuff like that. But the hypothesis there is, or what they would say is that there's three hypotheses that would explain the fine-tuning for life or moral conscious agents, and that would be design. It wouldn't be theism, it would be design itself, and chance itself, and physical necessity itself. Those are the three. It's a trichotomy. I don't know of any fourth option that's available. And so what it would do is it would compare the relative superiority of a design hypothesis over chance and physical necessity. And people would try to raise the probability that the outcome would take place on chance by invoking a multiverse, a modal realism, or something like that, or fatalism as physical necessity. I don't think that would work very well. And design, not theism, not Christian theism, but design itself as a hypothesis. Period. And then what I'm saying is that the universe, the psychophysical laws, are finely tuned for favorable outcomes or for intelligible outcomes with respect to human beings, individual human beings. The psychophysical laws that relate human brains to the world that they perceive, those are finely tuned for human conscious experience. And I would explain that fine-tuning by design. And the reason that I would explain it by design is because we're committed to the idea that they will, in fact, continue as we expect them to. It's a properly basic belief that they will. Okay. And if you were to invoke that they were finely tuned by chance, then you would be at odds with your own properly basic belief that they will continue, because it's actually more likely that they would diverge on chance than continue.
Okay, and but so none of this addresses the criticism that I'm raising. So let's go back to the traditional argument, perhaps. Do you think that's a good argument?
Sure.
Good. Okay. So let me ask you this: do you think that the apparent fine-tuning of the physical constants is confirmation of the design hypothesis?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you still agree that confirmation is what's predicted on a hypothesis? I'm sorry, what's predicted on a hypothesis coming true?
I don't know.
Well,
maybe not.
Okay, so then you'll have to explain what you understand confirmation to be if you don't think it's that.
Right, and it'll go back to the whole Bayesian concept of
no. Don't get into that. I'm just asking you to give me an analysis of the concept of confirmation.
I'm explaining to you why I don't know if I can take this definition. Maybe you can explain what's.
But you're the person who thinks that the fine-tuning, the apparent fine-tuning of the physical constants of the universe is confirmation of the design hypothesis, right? So presumably you have an analysis in mind of what confirmation is, right? For that to be an intelligible claim as well as a rational one,
yeah.
Right? So I'm just asking you what that is. If you don't think it's what's predicted on a hypothesis coming true, I'm asking you what else it could be. And let me add that I'm using confirmation in a very standard way in the philosophy of science and the philosophy of explanation. Right? Now, there's nothing wrong with having proprietary language. I'm just trying to understand what you're understanding confirmation to be.
Maybe confirmation is the wrong word here. I'm just saying that design is the best explanation.
Okay. So let's talk about explanations, right? Do you think that something can explain something else if it doesn't actually predict it?
Yes. Okay.
So explain to me how that works. How does something explain something else without predicting it?
So just like any kind of law that would explain any kind of law that would explain a particular phenomenon, it wouldn't entail the particular phenomenon that's in question. However,
maybe I can ask you a simpler question. Give me an example of something, right? Just a basic everyday example of something that explains something else without predicting it.
So you could explain, for example, a price increase in a particular neighborhood without the theory of inflation or any theory that deals with inflation entailing that particular neighborhood.
Well, I didn't say anything about entailment. I'm just saying prediction.
I don't see. I don't understand how you're using these words. Like it's like you're just
Well, see, I'm actually using the words the way they're used. I'm actually using the words the way they're used in the philosophical literature.
Right,
in
right.
The philosophy
so obviously
of
we're having a conversation.
and the philosophy of science, right? Now, that's perfectly fine for you not to be well versed in that literature. There's no sin or shame in that of any kind, right? But nonetheless, right, you are making a very specific claim, right? You're saying explanation doesn't presuppose prediction, right? There can be explanation. X can explain A without X generating the predictive expectation of A. So you clearly must have something in mind by what explanation is and how it could work, right, if it doesn't involve prediction. So what I asked you to do was just give me a simple example of something that explains something else without actually predicting it.
I mean, yeah. So like in the theory of evolution would explain a whole list of different things that we have discovered about human beings. It would explain particular organ functions or whatever, or it would explain what they might have used to have been. But it wasn't. The theory of evolution doesn't directly predict anything, any particularity about human organs. It wouldn't.
I don't see how it explains it then. How does it do that?
Right. So like you could expect that that there was whatever function that an organ used to perform was no longer necessary or no longer played a role in an organism's fitness, and so that it was allowed to drift into whatever vestigial state that it ended up with. Right, and that would be an explanation, but it's not predicted by evolution. It's just explained by it.
But I'm trying to understand. You're saying that, well, what's the phenomenon in question? Give me a specific phenomenon in question that we're seeking to explain.
A non-functioning organ, a vestigial organ.
So something like an appendix or something?
Yeah.
Okay, now tell me what's the explanation for the existence of the appendix? Is that what we're trying to explain?
Yeah. The existence of an organ that is not really essential to human life, and yet it exists, and yet it's there.
Okay, so give me a proposed explanation. How do you explain the existence of an appendix? How might you explain it?
Right, that it served a prior function, and that it no longer played whatever role it once played to an organism's fitness, and then because it no longer serves some kind of essential function. It's just some kind of it's an organ that we've carried on that is no longer necessary, and so that would explain why it is a vestigial organ and that it's still there. Otherwise, you're looking up and down.
I'm feeling confused as to what it is we're explaining. Are we explaining why we have appendixes? Is that what
I don't know. Like you asked a vague question.
I asked you a very
People generally
question.
think that evolution
I asked you to give me an example of an everyday phenomenon, right, that we could give an explanation for where the explanation didn't actually predict the phenomenon that it purports to explain. So it's a very specific question, right? There's nothing vague about it. So it's your example. You're the one who's making the claim that we can have explanations of empirical phenomena that are not predicted by the explanans, right? And I'm just asking you to give me an example of that so I can try to figure out how it could work that there would be explanations without predictions.
Well, do you agree that that theory of evolution doesn't predict that a human would have an appendix?
I don't know what you take the theory of evolution to be.
As broad or specific as you want to.
I really have no clue what the theory of evolution is.
Okay. I mean, this is this is relatively simple. I don't think this is exactly on topic anyway.
Well, wait a minute. You don't think it's on topic that we understand how something could explain something else without predicting it? If that's built into our concept of explanation?
I'm just trying to think of a way to. I mean, I've already explained my reasoning process in the actual argument.
I don't think anybody understands your reasoning process. Can I just ask people in the room? Does anybody understand Aaron's reasoning?
Well, I know Josh would, because we've had this very conversation before.
Well, I think what he's trying to say is that a hypothesis is something like universal common ancestry, and through means of genetic drift and mutation, we have all the biodiversity that we have now, right? Is that, and so he wants to say that what explains the biodiversity is that we've evolved over time.
No, I mean, no, I was talking about the argument that I was making earlier on consciousness. I think you at least understand my reasoning process.
You're talking about saying, like, you're talking about like eliminating other possible explanations there and concluding that the design hypothesis there is the best explanation in virtue of the elimination of the other potential hypotheses.
Elimination of necessity, but it would be a relative superiority over over chance. It wouldn't be sort of elimination.
So, like with chance, there's just no explanation for the phenomenon, right? It's simply random. There's that's not what we would call an explanation. So
no, I'm talking about on chance. It's perfectly compatible with psychophysical laws being the way they are by chance. But then if they are by chance, then the content of my mind is not in this kind of relationship with the world that I would expect it to continue on as I expect it to.
I don't know why. I don't know. You're saying that if chance explains. Sorry, that's the weird way. You're saying if
it's perfectly compatible with chance for me to have the exact series of experiences that I've had up to this point.
Right.
And it's perfectly compatible with chance that it would continue on as I expect it to. However, it's more likely that it will diverge than for it to continue on. And so if I am committed to the idea that it will continue as I expect, then I can't hold consciousness or psychophysical laws to be a product of chance, or that the fine-tuning was a product of chance.
Because you want to say that with chance, there's presumably some finite set of possible conditions relative to which there's a probability space, and if it were chance, it could be any of those series of events. That's what you're saying?
Right. That there's a certain realm of possible experiences that I could have in the future that are within the realm of expectation, that they would remain what I would call rational or intelligible if they were to take place. But then there's extremely wide range of different experiences that I could have, including not having one at all, that if the psychophysical laws that dictate the content of any particular human mind are products of chance, and the universe is not designed with me in taken into consideration, the universe is sort of unguided or unplanned, then I would have no expectation whatsoever that it will continue to persist as it has. Right, but if we have a guided universe or a planned universe that takes into consideration human beings, then that is the only rational way that I have to make the commitment that I'm forced to make innately that my life will continue to be intelligible, or that my experiences.
So I don't see, like, it's going to come back to this issue about the question is what you think explains the physical laws or the psychophysical laws, right? So you want to say what explains the psychophysical laws is that there is a being who is intent on creating these psychophysical laws as such?
It's not the existence of the psychophysical laws that I'm explaining. It's the specificity of them. It's the fine-tuning of them. They exist in an extremely specific way. They're contingent events, and there are supposedly laws that orient these things that fix the content of a given experience in a given situation. And if these laws that fix the content are not designed in such a way that human beings are taken into account, then there's no rational basis that I would have to expect them to continue on the way that I do.
That doesn't make any
well,
sense to me.
You're eliminating other potential explanations that also generate the prediction that we would have the cognitive faculties that we have, but it just seems like you're doing that by fiat.
No, I'm not eliminating it. I'm saying that
we agree. Let's say we agree it's not chance because there's a low probability given some finite probability space,
yeah.
right? But I mean, I don't really understand how we would set. There's an epistemic concern about how we would set the probability space for something being chance, because like what's the? I mean, I don't understand why there would be an argument that there's. First of all, probabilities only work with a finite probability space, and it doesn't seem like there could be like an infinite number of psychophysical laws. So I don't even know if we could do a type of probability calculus.
Well, we've had a certain number of experiences so far, and we know that experiences are relegated to things like brains and not other physical systems. But we don't have a way to distinguish the processes going on in any particular brain from any other particular physical system. There's no reason for me to expect consciousness to be in a brain by virtue of anything that I can describe about a brain. And yet, very specific processes that go on in brains produce very specific experiences within them. And
right, so you want to say that correlation is consistent with it being chance, right? And I'm saying, yeah, that's true.
Right.
But the only way that we could establish a probability space is if we could justify our knowledge of all the salient features, which I don't think that we can do. I don't think that we can justify what the probability space is in any case. But if I grant for the sake of argument that there is a finite probability space, and that is, because that's where the intuition leads, is that probability space would be low. If I grant that for the sake of argument, that's still not, so we say that chance is off the table. Okay, I agree there. That doesn't, and you want to say that you posit a psychophysical law explainer, and if all it does is generate the prediction that we would have these psychophysical laws, it doesn't seem to me like it's any better than any other ad hoc hypothesis that generates the same prediction.
No, I mean, it would be the point that the argument is to say that the universe itself is coordinated in such a way that takes into consideration human lives, human intelligibility, and things like that. I don't know if I would say that it's depending on how would formulate it. You might just say for something that is entailed by the way that we have experiences and relationships. But what I'm saying is we're committed to a certain outcome that we have absolutely no basis for on any kind of physical necessity, or certainly on chance. That it would be irrational to take our commitment that they will continue on as we expect it to, on chance. And I think that necessity itself is falsified by our own fallibility, or the fact that brains themselves, not only are they fallible, but you could have a brain that is not even conscious.
There might be an identity theorist about that's going to disagree with you. Right.
Well, even an identity theorist believes in hallucinations and believes that certain brain states are conscious or unconscious.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that they're going to be people that are going to disagree. They're going to think that there's going to be a physical necessity, that if you get a brain configured in such a way, you're going to get consciousness. So they think that there's an identity relation between those two. I don't happen to share that.
Only a reductive physicalist could make that argument.
No, they're non-reductive. Those are non-reductive physicalists.
Identity theorists are reductive.
No. There's non-reductive identity theories.
No.
Like their property dualists, for example, don't think that they think that there's physical properties and mental properties, but the mental supervenes on the physical properties. But they think that there's an identity relation between the mental properties and the physical properties. That aside, that's not a view that I hold.
Yeah, whatever.
I'm just saying that your objection begs the question against those. In any case, I'm just not seeing why. Like the inference that I take it to be is that it's the best explanation in virtue of the fact that it actually predicts the phenomenon. But you want to contest that. You want to say it's not the case that it predicts what we would see. And so I mean, I don't really understand how it would explain what we see if it doesn't predict what we see if the hypothesis is true.
Right. So that would be kind of like the point that Jack is making, and I think that's an argument from like an appeal to a low prior probability. But to take the full thing into account, a low prior probability, or the idea that given a particular hypothesis, the chance of seeing a particular observation might be low in terms of a prior probability. But given, let's see, I'm trying to think about how I'm going about this. That the probability of a hypothesis being true can be raised by a high probability of the.
Can I just say, I think the idea is that, like, if you wanted to explain something and you had you offered a type of intentional explanation, which it seems like any theistic explanation is going to be,
right,
that you're going to have to appeal to capacities and desires, right? But when you're appealing to those capacities and desires, the only reason that you're going to get the outcome is because you've built into the hypothesis the agent with those capacities and desires. So, like, I mean, I could do that with anything. Imagine I wanted to explain some random phenomenon X, like let's say I wanted to explain the movement of a boulder. I could just appeal to an agent who had the ability to move a boulder that way and the desire to move the boulder that way. Right. But there's and then I say, well, another person could appeal to physical laws that explain the boulder moving in a particular way. And the only reason to prefer one explanation over another explanation is in virtue of further predictions that are generated, novel predictions that are generated on the truth of one hypothesis. Otherwise, I would see the two as basically being isomorphic hypotheses, and they're not really being a fact of the matter about whether or not it's physical or agential, etc.
Right, but the difference here is, though, that we're committed to a prediction that is extremely low on the alternative, but it's not low on theism or on the design.
I mean, I just don't understand what justifies it, because it seems like what you're saying, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is the only thing that makes it high, right, is appeal to the motivations and capacities that you've built within the hypothesis. But that's what I'm saying is an ad hoc proffering. Right, because the only thing that it explains is the phenomenon to be explained, and there's no independent reason to accept that. Like, because I could just build in that there's some meta law such that if this meta law is true, we should always expect to see these psychophysical laws. You know?
Right, but we don't commit to that kind of thing when we think about an unguided universe. If the universe is not guided, then or guided toward specific human outcomes, that would itself would falsify it. Like, it only makes sense to think that a universe is guided toward convenient or favorable human outcomes if it's designed that way by some designer who would think that would be a favorable thing for that designer, like a desire.
No. It's also the case that we should expect it if there's a meta law that explains why the psychophysical laws obtain the way they do.
I guess if you could say that.
Right, so the only reason for there to be a fact of the matter between those two hypotheses is in virtue of the further predictions that they generate. And as it stands, I don't see either generating either prediction. So appealing, so like I don't think that there's any derivable further predictions that we could generate on a theistic hypothesis. So if that were true, it seems to me like what you would be committed to is that there's no fact of the matter about whether or not this thing has capacities and desires. There's just some sort of mechanistic law that also generates the same prediction of psychophysical laws. It seems to me like that's what one in your position would be committed to.
So if we take right, there would have to be some kind of difference.
I'm going AFK for a sec. I gotta use the restroom. Well, listen.
Yeah, there would have to be some kind of difference between invoking a new law that specifically says that the universe is guided toward human outcomes, and that is just a mechanistic law that says that, versus saying that the universe is designed by some designer who is taking into consideration favorable human outcomes. And I would think that just in terms of like the way it's natural to think about it, I would think that the theism would make more sense. That it would make more sense that a being, a personal agent, would take into consideration other personal agents than, you know, there being some kind of mechanistic law that just sort of asserts that would be there. Because
right, but I'm saying, like, in this case, the difference between those two is purely, it's almost like it's stipulative. Like, there's nothing. It ought to be something like an empirical endeavor, but it's not. It's actually consistent with both hypotheses. So what I would do is I would take that to be an underdetermining factor in saying that there was a fact of the matter about what hypothesis was true, right? And so that's what I'm saying, is that you saying that there is a fact of the matter, I'm asking, in virtue of what would there be a fact of the matter? It doesn't seem like it would make any sense for you to say, well, it's in virtue of my intuition about what this would likely mean, because I'm saying, what I'm charging is that, is there actually a difference in the meaning of the two hypotheses where they generate the exact same predictive expectations? And what I'm contesting is that there's not, in fact.
right, but wouldn't there be a difference between stipulating a law as when you stipulate that an agent is acting toward a given end? It's not exactly the same kind of stipulation as stipulating a law that dictates this entire set of contingent circumstances, right? That one of these.
Look, if I were to ask you, if you were to say there's an agent that generates such a series of psychophysical laws, and then someone were to come up to you and say, no, it's not an agent, it's a meta law that sets what laws are going to come about, and then I come in as a third person and I say, well, what's the difference? What are you gonna tell me that the difference between the two hypotheses is, apart from the words in which they're couched?
I mean, there's a difference between the two. I don't know if they'd obviously be empirically equivalent, but there would be a difference between the two.
So why, if they're empirically equivalent, why should we think that there's a fact of the matter about which one is true? Because, like, on the one hand, it seems like you're just saying, well, yeah, we can get these phenomena. Like, take something that there are that there's also a bunch of what I take to be isomorphic, empirical data for. So, like, if you take a bunch of different interpretations of quantum mechanics, I could add another interpretation of quantum mechanics called God quantum mechanics, wherein God predicts those same phenomena, right?
Mm-hmm.
In quantum mechanics, and I could just add that to the list of interpretations of quantum mechanics where this is exactly what we would expect to see if God quantum mechanics were true, right? And so for someone like me, if a theory is not to be understood in terms of its empirical or conceptual merits, then it doesn't seem to me like there's going to be a fact of the matter about the truth of that theory, right? That seems to me that they're just instrumental models that are useful for sort of predicting our experience.
No, it wouldn't undermine the ability for there to be a fact of the matter. It would lead to the conclusion that epistemology and specifically science, but epistemology in general is underdetermined, which I agree with. But like if I'm just gonna sit down,
hold on. See, like the point is that, look, I'm saying in virtue of what. Now, if you appeal to the empirical difference, that's what you could say. In virtue of this, it's in virtue of the empirical difference that there's a fact of the matter. Now, if it's not in virtue of the empirical difference, you might want to say it's in virtue of some conceptual constraints. Now, I don't know what those conceptual constraints would be in your case. I mean, I can think of a few examples, like something like qualia, because qualia-minded individuals are going to generate all the same predictions as non-minded individuals. Like if I let's say I believe that P zombies are true or something, and I like, and I looked, there would be nothing that anybody could show me to convince me that someone else, some other person, was not a P zombie, you know. So, but there would be a conceptual difference between a minded and a non-minded individual. But
Right.
I think the point, is that you'd have to, in that case, you'd have to appeal to something in virtue of which there was a fact of the matter about whether or not your hypothesis was true, and I don't see a reason to accept that. I mean, you want to say that there's a mind there, right? But why should anybody think that's true? Because that would be something in virtue of which, that would be something in virtue of which there could be a fact of the matter, as if there was a minded thing there, right? But
yeah, well, minds are the kinds of things that design things to serve a purpose, whereas mechanistic laws don't necessarily do that. That doesn't rule out the fact that there might be this mechanistic law that would just so happen to orchestrate all the psychophysical laws to be
well,
to
when
be
you
in
say
place.
when you say just so happen, there you're implying that there's some kind of brute contingency about a non-intentional explanation, and there isn't one about the intentional explanation. But see, the thing is, you can ask the same question about the intentional explanation, right? Because you're just saying he just so happens to have these desires. The agent just so happens to have these desires, right? So you aren't actually solving any problem by positing an agent in that case, because the same question will arise at the level of the agent, which is, why does the agent have these desires rather than others, right? And so you get an infinite regress fine-tuning explanations. So I don't think it's correct to say it just so happens to do this in the one case, but it doesn't just so happen to do it in the other case. That's why it's important to answer the question about how you can give independent justification for your hypothesis, because basically what Josh is pointing out to you is you've got an ad hoc explanation, right? And you're trying to claim that an ad hoc explanation is a good explanation, right? But ad hoc explanations are not good explanations, right? Anybody can construct an ad hoc explanation to explain any phenomenon, right? The point is that what we're looking for when we look for good explanations is we're looking for an explanation that has independent justification. You haven't provided anything remotely like that with respect to your claim that this is a good explanation.
Well, it would depend on whether or not it is. It would be an appeal to an explanatory virtue, I would think, because it's weird to think that
what virtue?
Well, I mean, it's more in line with what we think about personal agents.
There's a set of different virtues, right, that are taken to be explanatory virtues that help us choose between competing explanations. So if you think that your explanation possesses explanatory virtues over rival ones, what are they? What are the virtues you're appealing
so
to?
One of them is that it removes your sense of puzzlement about an issue.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what explanatory virtue that is, that it removes your sense of puzzlement. The whole point about explanation is that it explains a mystery. So it's not some virtue over and above its being an explanation at all, that it removes puzzlement. That's not the name of an explanatory virtue, right?
Universe creating fairies remove my puzzlement about the origin of the universe.
Any explanation that's a good explanation removes puzzlement, right? That's what it means for it to be a good explanation. What we're asking you to provide is in virtue of what is it a good explanation.
Okay, so we've all come to the conclusion that it's undetermined, right?
That's one conclusion we've come to. Another conclusion we've come to, at least that Josh and I have come to, is that you have what appears to be an ad hoc explanation.
No. The issue of psychophysical laws themselves, the explanation of their fine-tuning, we're granting for the sake of argument that they're fine-tuned, that is an underdetermined. There are two empirically equivalent theories that we could give. One is some mechanistic law, and one is
all empirical facts are underdetermined by all hypotheses are underdetermined by observations. That's just a feature of explanatory hypotheses, that they're underdetermined.
Right. So now, if you're going to commit to a sort of fixed relationship of your experiences to a kind of way that you expect the world to turn out, does it make more sense to assume that it is a purposeful relationship, that it serves some kind of purpose or is taken into consideration, or does it make more sense to just sort of posit some new law out there, we know not what, and we couldn't verify?
Well, that's what we're asking you. You're saying that one makes more sense than the other, and we're asking you in virtue of what?
Right. To me, it's more natural to assume theism than a mechanistic law.
I'm not asking you whether it's more natural to you or not. I'm asking you what explanatory virtue favors your hypothesis over any rival one that predicts the same outcome.
Right. And I'm saying that theism, as it's been generally conceived.
But you're not answering the question. I'm asking you, what's the explanatory virtue?
That is the explanatory virtue, is that it's a more natural.
I don't know what you mean by natural. That just sounds like you're saying it's more intuitive to you. That's
right.
Not an explanatory virtue, right? I don't care whether you find it intuitive or not. Other people will have different intuitions. It doesn't tell anything about the value of the hypothesis that you find it intuitive. Right? I don't care anything about that. I'm asking
we're not going to.
I'm asking you why rationally. Okay.
Right. So are you asking me for empirical verification?
I'm asking you for explanatory virtues.
Right, and one of those is basicality or naturalness.
No, that is not one of those. That is just begging the question against your opponent. I'm not asking you to do that. Right? I'm asking you to tell me why I ought to accept your explanation as a better explanation than the rivals.
I think the point is that you can just say that if someone were to give the opposite view, like if they were just to say, I have the opposite intuition, that's not going to be compelling to you to say, okay, well, I ought to accept it then.
Right, but the way they would be doing it would be by appealing to a new mindless law.
You're doing it by appealing to a new minded entity.
Right.
What's the difference?
Yeah, they're both ad hoc.
They're both completely ad hoc.
The point is, we already agreed that there's an underdetermined conclusion that we're going to reach here. And so when you do it, you either do it based on what your intuition is, or you don't do it at all.
Look, if all you're going to do is report your testimony that you happen to find the existence of God or the existence of a designer that to your mind, right, would desire specific things like finely tuned psychophysical laws, there's no need. I mean, you could have just saved us all a lot of time at the outset by telling us that was what you were doing. Right? We thought that you actually had some kind of argument that would favor that hypothesis.
It's
right?
the same. It's the same kind of.
What you're saying now is that actually my hypothesis is completely ad hoc, as are all the other rivals, and there's no reason for anybody to favor any of them, but I happen to prefer one because it's natural. It seems natural to me.
It's exactly the same form as a traditional fine-tuning argument. However, it overcomes.
I don't see what difference that makes. I don't see what difference that makes. I don't think that the traditional fine-tuning arguments survive any of these objections any better than yours does. Right,
but then you could do the same thing
you aren't even giving an argument. You're just saying, look, we don't have an explanation for this phenomenon, so I'm going to posit something X.
I didn't. No.
I'm going to posit something X, which has the capacity to explain this phenomenon, and what I'm going to specify about how it explains it is by giving it a mind and saying that it desires the phenomenon.
Right.
And then I'm going to say, okay, that's one potential explanation, right? Another potential explanation is here's an entity Y that's non-minded, right, that can explain the hypothesis, right? I can't give any specificity over and above, those mere facts that they have the capacity to explain the phenomenon in question and have the disposition to do so. The only thing that distinguishes them is that one is minded and the other is not, right? And the minded one explains.
Or you're cutting out.
Sorry, can you hear me? The other one
A little bit better.
explains the phenomenon. The minded one explains the phenomenon in virtue of the fact that the agent actually desires the phenomenon that the hypothesis was designed to explain, right?
Right.
And now that's
But
not
then,
an argument. That's just positing two potential ad hoc explanations for the phenomenon. And then what you're saying is, well, one of them is more natural to me.
One might think also
Right.
that, like, there might be some type of inductive argument you might make against yours because of some explanatory virtue. Like, we wouldn't know of minds that operate irrespective of the physical laws in which they exist. You operate in a minded way because there are certain physical laws that undergird your existence. So if that weren't the case for the minded individual, like you might even say that that's a worse hypothesis, because it's a mind unlike a mind that we've ever even known. Like it doesn't seem like any
right.
type
Okay. So let me ask you a question. If I had two different competing theories, one of the theories takes the extension of a particular set of phenomena, and it says that it dictates that this, whatever the extension is of the set of phenomena is, it dictates that those things occur. And then I have another theory that in conjunction with a set of conditions would entail that those phenomena happened. Wouldn't one of them have more of an explanatory virtue than the other? That wouldn't one that just sort of picks out the particular events one by one and says, here's a law that says that these particular events will happen, and then that's the law that we're going to refer to. And then have another law that would not pick them out in particularity, but it would sort of give rise to a set of different, the same observations or type of observations that would fit within that theory, but it wouldn't be just picked out and particularized. Isn't one of these different from the other? Like, if I say that the universe is fine-tuned, is designed or finely tuned for human experiences, and then I just pick out a meta law that just dictates particular kinds of psychophysical laws, and then I just call that a law. Isn't that different from invoking an object that could or had the capacity to select these things and be specific just by virtue of having a belief and desire complex? Wouldn't these two things be different? Wouldn't it be more natural to take one instead of the other?
What would they be different in virtue of? Are they empirically equivalent?
Sure.
Then I don't understand what they're different in virtue of.
In terms of the explanatory virtue, that you wouldn't just invoke a law that would say that.
Which explanatory virtue?
I don't know what you would call it. I just described it.
Well, the problem is they're both ad hoc, and ad hocness isn't an explanatory virtue.
Well, he might think that two ad hoc hypotheses, if we had two ad hoc hypotheses, that one could be favored in virtue of it having some explanatory virtue. But I'm not understanding what explanatory virtue he's appealing to favor his hypothesis over the other.
If I posited some natural law to account for some unexplained phenomenon, you might think that that's because we have a whole host of successful natural explanations. You might think that that's more plausible than me positing some supernatural entity for doing that. But nevertheless, both would be ad hoc to that effect, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So if I were to take,
so like there's something like they have like ontological economy, simplicity. There's also degree of ad hocness, which is obviously not a feature here. Predictive novelty,
integration with background knowledge,
unification,
explanatory scope, those kinds of things.
right. So if if someone were to take the conjunction of this argument with the traditional fine-tuning argument itself, I guess you could just include another meta law.
But there isn't an argument. You haven't given any argument, right? I just explained that, right? What you did was say we have an unexplained phenomenon, and we can posit that either it was explained by an agent that has the desire and the capacity to produce the phenomenon in question, or we can imagine some naturalistic force that has the disposition to produce the phenomenon in question, right? That's not an argument. The problem is here are two potential candidates.
Right, but the problem is it's not the existence of the laws.
Both are incredibly ad hoc. I mean, both are entirely ad hoc, right? But nonetheless, they're logically possible, and so maybe they're both true. That's not an argument, right? There's no inference there to either of those, right?
It's not the okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Right. It's not the existence. I'm not saying that here's a phenomenon and here's what describes the existence of this phenomenon. It's the specificity that they would have to have. That if you're going to invoke some kind of meta law with all this specificity in it, then there might as well just be some other random law out there. Like it's just sort of this doesn't make any sense. But if you posit an intelligent agent with a purpose, then that could give rise to the conditions.
Look, you're not understanding the objection that I made earlier, right? If you say, look, there's something that is unexplained in virtue of its appearing finely tuned, and so what I'm going to do is solve the mystery of this apparent fine-tunedness by postulating an agent that desires those specific things, right?
No, not those specific things. No, it would desire intelligibility, and that could give rise to.
It desires intelligibility, right? So the question would then be, we have the unexplained phenomenon of the finely tuned desire of intelligibility. What explains that, right? You just have an infinite regress of explanations. So I don't see how there's any reason to favor your explanation as being more explanatory virtuous over somebody who just rejects positing a designer.
When you say explanatory virtue, you can't be asking for like something like independent confirmation or something like that, because then that would entail that they wouldn't
for something like that.
Well, then they wouldn't be empirically equivalent, right?
Right. Which is why there's not really a good reason to accept ad hoc explanations.
Right, but like say we were in a discussion about the philosophy of mind, and we're saying that a particular theory of mind doesn't explain intentionality as well as another one, or that it would entail kind of...
No, you're talking about a different type of explanation there. Because when it comes to philosophy of mind, we're not talking about explaining empirical facts by positing some empirical theory, right? We're talking about two different conceptual analyses, and we're trying to figure out which one is the better conceptual analysis.
We're talking about different metaphysical pictures of the way the world works, right? We're talking about ontology.
That's a priori.
Right, but it's still underdetermined.
But that's irrelevant. The point is that when it comes to a priori disputes, right? We don't actually look for evidence to favor one over the other.
Right, we appeal
because neither hypothesis generates predictive expectations, right? When we're dealing with empirical phenomena,
what does it generate then?
What does what generate?
Right, what does it one particular philosophy of mind position generate?
It doesn't generate predictive expectations.
No. Well, what does it generate?
It doesn't generate anything.
Right. So, yes. Like you could be a direct realist and then bite the bullet on whatever implications it would be, and some other person would say, no, that's kind of spooky. It makes more sense to me to be a representationalist. No, what are they doing there?
I don't think that philosophical disputes need to be settled by appeals to intuitions.
Then how do you ever settle anything?
By showing that the alternative view is self-contradictory, for example.
Right, but if you have two empirically equivalent ones, one will bite the bullet against one intuition, and another one will bite the bullet against a different one, and they both think that each other is wrong, then why would you ever be a transcendental idealist over any?
Transcendental idealism is the only coherent theory.
So everything else leads to contradiction.
Yes, that's the only coherent theory of the relation between subject and object. Every other one is self-contradictory. But look, this is all beside the point.
Wait. You invoke the noumena, right? You invoke the noumena. And do you have any independent confirmation of noumenal?
It's not an empirical claim.
Right, but it's a metaphysical one. Like someone could say that it's not there.
Metaphysical claims are not settled. They couldn't say that because it would entail them, it would enmesh them in a contradiction.
No. Earlier you said that subjective idealism would just lead to a kind of inexplicability about.
It wouldn't just lead to that, because it would ultimately be a self-defeating claim, because you wouldn't be able to build a concept of intentionality which would be consistent with pure randomness. And so
right. Okay. So you don't have anything other than just an expectation or some random commitment to intentionality being as you.
I said it would be a self-defeating claim to think otherwise. So there is something more. I'm saying it's self-contradictory to affirm the contrary, right? But I don't see the relevance of any of this. We're not actually engaging in a metaphysical dispute, right? You're trying to explain an empirical phenomenon, which you claim is some kind of apparent fine-tuning of psychophysical laws, whatever those are. So what you could do is construct a hypothesis that you had independent justification for, and then we could look for confirmation of the novel facts predicted by the theory. Right? But you don't actually have a theory like that, right? And you don't even have an argument for your hypothesis, right? All you have is an intuition that it's more plausible than some rival naturalistic hypothesis that somebody could construct that would be equally empty of informative content, right?
I don't think it would be.
See, when you started this discussion, what you said was you thought that the only way we could account for this phenomenon, at least plausibly, right, was to appeal to a designer, right? And I spent hours trying to find out what your argument was, right? And now here we are, 4 hours later, or whatever it's been. It turns out you never had an argument. You were just calling something an argument that wasn't an argument. You were merely positing some hypothetical explanation that's basically a normative virtue, because all it is it explains it in virtue of its capacity to explain it, right? It's just worthless from the standpoint of explanation. What we were hoping to get from you, okay, so I'll stop now, and you can talk, and then I will continue when you're done.
Right. So I am not committed to the idea that the only way to reason about things in nature or in metaphysics is by virtue of whatever it entails. Because
who said anything about that? We never said in virtue of what anything entails.
I mean something empirical, right? Because when you're asking me for in virtue of what, you're asking for independent empirical confirmation. You're asking
I'm asking for any explanatory virtue that might favor one hypothesis over the other. It turns out the only thing that you've been able to provide is that you find it more natural to believe it, which is not an explanatory virtue.
That's a mischaracterization.
Well, if that's a mischaracterization, then just tell me what's the explanatory virtue that favors your hypothesis over the rivals.
It would be the virtue that would take you positing a law that would entail a certain phenomenon as a result of certain laws and conditions, or just conditions, I guess, versus a meta law that just entailed the events themselves.
I don't understand.
Right, like if there could
How
be
would that get around the problem that I raised about the fact that the same argument would apply to the finely tuned desires of the explainer? of the explanans.
I think you could probably always
If there's going to be
push
an
it back
infinite
that way.
regressive explanations, why embark upon that type of explanation in the first place? What problem does it solve? It doesn't actually solve the problem of fine-tuning. It just pushes, if there is such a thing, is such a problem, it doesn't solve the problem. It just pushes the problem back up to a higher level, at which point we have to engage in the same postulation of a new explanatory agent to explain that, right? Which will then bring about the same problem. So the question is, why engage in it in the first place if it doesn't actually solve the problem that it purports to solve?
Yeah, I don't know if you would ever posit there's a law that says that a designer would have certain beliefs and desires.
Look, are you committed to the idea that if there was a designer that explained the fine-tuning of psychophysical laws, that the same reasoning would be implied for the designer itself, and that there would be an infinite regress of designers?
No.
Okay, so now why?
Because it would
Why
be...
wouldn't the same problem arise at the higher level?
Right, because you could invoke, it would warrant an explanation if the desire itself was a list of particularities, right? But one thing happening to be the case rather than one big set of particulars is different. The specificity in one would warrant an explanation.
Look. The problem you're trying to explain is apparent fine-tuning of X, right? Apparent fine-tuning of X. The only way you are actually going to explain why things are tuned at those values, right? Whatever they are, constants or anything, right? Is to posit an agent who desires that they are tuned at those constants, which means that they have finely tuned desires.
No.
Well, then it doesn't. Then it won't actually explain why they are at those specific constants, tuned at those specific constants rather than others, because there'll be something else that you will need in your explanation to explain why they're at those specific values rather than others. Right? That's the whole point about explanation. Explains. Okay. Does your explanation explain why they are at those values rather than others?
Not directly, right? It would explain
what explains why they are at those values rather than others. What explains that?
Different considerations, right? But the hypothesis itself would be.
I'm just asking you a simple question, right? You have a hypothesis that you think explains fine-tuning, right? So my question to you is, if it explains fine-tuning, explain to me how your hypothesis explains why the values in question are tuned specifically at those values. How does it do it?
Right, but by taking into consideration the different mental states and even choices of the different conscious agents.
No,
so in light of
that's not an answer to my question. That's saying that there's a way in which you could appeal to some considerations that would explain it. I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you what specifically explains it. What specifically explains why, in a given case, something that you're trying to explain in relation to fine-tuning is specifically tuned at value X. Give me an example.
Right, and I'm not granting you that I would have to know that particular outcome. In fact, if I did,
but then you wouldn't be explaining the fine-tuning, because the point about the fine-tuning is why. The mystery is why are they tuned at that specific value? If your explanation doesn't explain that, it doesn't explain the phenomenon of fine-tuning.
No, the fine-tuning is a range of things that it could turn out to be. There's a certain range within the realm of expectation that would be intelligible. Like different courses of history could take place, and they would all be intelligible in their own. And I don't know which specific outcomes there might be.
Do you understand the mystery is why things are tuned at specific values?
The mystery is why intelligibility exists, right? It's not the specificity is involved.
I thought you were
because
saying that the mystery was. I thought you were saying that what the mystery was, why the physical laws, the psychophysical laws are finely tuned.
Right.
So, what explains why they are tuned at the values that they're tuned?
I couldn't give you reasons off the top of my head.
So then that fact remains unexplained on your account, right? It's really a very simple question. Yeah, it's open, so it means you don't have an explanation, right? So what I'm seeing is I'm not seeing how you're giving us anything at all, right? You're claiming to solve a mystery, right? And then when I ask you, how do you solve the mystery? You say, oh, well, the question is open. So the mystery is unsolved.
No, you're being flippant with what I'm saying here.
Okay, so let me repeat the question.
There is not a determinate outcome from the hypothesis that the universe is designed taking humans into consideration in our lives, in the intelligibility of our lives. Right, but just because there's no determinate outcome that's entailed by that hypothesis does not mean that it doesn't entail.
Did the designer select the specific values?
Yes.
That you're okay. So that means he had finely tuned desires for those values, right?
No.
It doesn't mean that.
No, it doesn't.
So it was just random. He just chose it randomly? Oh, so it wasn't random. So he actually had a desire for those specific values.
Maybe individually, but only in light of whatever considerations there would be to give light to.
Did he select the specific values or not?
You're trying to pigeonhole into something that doesn't make sense. Okay, it's not something I'm arguing for.
It doesn't make sense to say that he chose the specific values in question?
Sure, he chose them. Yes, he chose them.
He chose them. Great. Now, did he choose those on the basis of a desire for those values or not?
No, that's not what I'm positing. If it did, it would be exactly like that.
What sense is it a choice if he didn't choose it in virtue of desiring those values? They were like they were some incidental effect of another choice, like a byproduct. Is that the idea?
It's the same way that you would buy a tool in order to have.
So then the question.
You won't let me answer questions.
All right, go ahead.
Right. In the same way. In the same way that you would buy a tool, not because you like the tool, but because you like the thing that is produced by the tool, or that you would buy insurance, not because you want to pay these people money, but because of some other consideration, right? That would be the way that
is there still a mystery as to why those specific values were selected on your view?
Isn't the parallel? It just seems like isn't the parallel pretty clear, right? Like there's this like why does the designer have the specific psychophysical laws in mind? You know, like why doesn't he have some other? It seems like it's conceivable for him to have some other set of psychophysical laws in mind. Like why are they desires finely tuned to be these ones? You know, like let's say when you have a wavelength of some specific light wave, you know, that why does that produce a red sensation in observers as opposed to the green one? You know, like if you assume that he has the capacities to do so, right? Like if he doesn't have the capacities, then we might appeal to whatever constraints apply to him to explain why the psychophysical laws are what they are. But if you say that he's unconstrained with that matter, that he's open, then you might say that there's like potentially infinite number of types of desires that the agent with those types of capacities could have. So it's like why are they finely tuned to be what they are, such that the psychophysical laws are what they are? So it seems there's like a direct parallel.
He's saying that there's no mystery on his view as to why those specific constants were selected. But if that's the case, he should be. Oh, so there is a mystery.
Yeah, it doesn't entail.
Okay, so there's a mystery.
Let me just answer his question, please.
Okay, go ahead and answer the question, and then I'll ask mine.
Okay, so let's say, for example, a designer has a desire to create moral conscious agents that would have a robust sort of meaningful kind of existence. If he would do that, it would entail a priori that they would be embodied, or that they would at least in some way be able to be affected by others and to affect others. And for moral realism, they would have to have some kind of They would have to have some kind of predictable consequences of their actions within some kind of limitation, so that I could know what the consequences of my actions would be on other agents. And if I have moral truths, then I might be able to harm them. And so this kind of relationship might entail that they be embodied. And if there's a large number of them, it could entail that they have different kinds of relationships with each other, different hierarchies, and constructs within each other. For morality to be truly robust, you might entail that there's a certain degree of obscurity or hiddenness, so that it's not a fact about following orders for morality, but it would be the kind of thing that allows free people to make free choices and live by the moral law in and of itself. Right? These kinds of considerations could entail some kind of physical universe with embodied conscious agents. They have to have cognitive faculties that function properly, right? This simple kind of desire, with these simple considerations, would entail the particular, not exhaustively or determinately, but could entail this particular kind of way that we see the world today. Whereas in contrast with a view that said that God desires each specific or particular state of events in exactly the order that God desires each specific set of events, right? One theory would say God has a certain set of desires and considerations, and from that designs a particular universe. And the other one would be a theory that says, for whatever reason, God just happens to have every single event as a desire locked into his mind, right? One of those is plausible or natural or basic or intuitive or whatever you want to call it, and the other is not.
Well, I think the issue with that is that then you're not explaining why we have the psychophysical laws that we have. Then that's just an instance of you explaining why there are psychophysical laws, but that's not explaining the fine-tuning of these psychophysical laws, you know.
Hey,
Right, but I don't have to know exactly why these are there. I just have to know
The
that they're
reason
intelligible.
why you have to know that is because you're claiming to solve the mystery of fine-tuning, right? But there's a new mystery, which is that the designer that you're positing to solve that mystery itself selected specific values for for what it is that it is finely tuning for, right? And so there's a mystery as to why those values were selected rather than others, right? Which is, guess what? Is a fine-tuning mystery. And guess what we would have to do to explain that? We'd have to posit another designer that designed that designer to have finely tuned desires.
Not every time that you have something that is a mystery has to invoke a designer.
So are the specific desires a mystery?
In exhaustively or
he chose the specific values, right? He chose the specific values on the basis of some desire that he had, right?
No, yeah. I was just kind of trying to say, man, like, you guys are talking about evidence. I think he's trying to pinpoint evidence into something very scientific when you could consider testimony from people saying that Jesus walked the earth as evidence. So I'm kind of curious also, what is your definition of evidence?
reasons to believe something is true.
Reasons to believe something is true.
Or a set of facts that would lead someone to believe something is true. I mean, I don't know exactly what formal definition would be in line with what I'm doing here.
But before we get to the evidence question, I want to settle this issue.
So the type of explanation, Aaron, that you're proffering is the type in which explains that there are psychophysical laws as opposed to not psychophysical laws, but it's not explaining why there are the particular psychophysical laws that there are. It's not explaining the fine-tuning.
I disagree. It's not an explanation for why there are psychophysical laws.
You agree that the psychophysical laws could be different, right?
Right, but
that
they
there's
can
like
only
a
be
number
in a realm, like it can only be in a realm of what would be intelligible, like the specific course of history.
The whole point is that, like, you agree that there could be any number of psychophysical laws, So there's still a question of why we have the specific laws that we have, right? That question is unanswered. It's supposed to be finely tuned. So like, if you say that the fine tuning was 1 in a million, chances that they would be these specific psychophysical laws, well then there's a million other psychophysical laws possibilities that you have unaccounted for. Then you're not explaining why it's this 1 in a million set of psychophysical laws. Whatever you
Right,
want
but
to.
the argument is not doing that. It's saying that given the relationship, the psychophysical laws, given the relationship we have to the outside world and the relationship minds have to brains, and given its specificity, then it's more plausible that it was on a designed universe than an undesigned one.
I'm not sure how to.
Right. I mean, like there's a range of what would be intelligible.
You would need an
So, I mean,
example of an undesigned universe in order to say that, and in order to be justified in saying that. You would need to be able to demonstrate what an undesigned universe would look like in order to contrast how wonderfully designed this universe is.
But it's beside the point, right?
What we have is what we have is a.
He's selecting specific. The designer that he's positing is selecting specific values.
Yeah.
Being finely tuned, right? Which means that the desires are themselves finely tuned with respect to that selection. And so there needs to be, if in fact fine tuning is a mystery that needs to be explained, there's just going to be a further mystery at the level of the designer's desires that we would then have reason to posit a further designer to explain why the first order designers desires were finely tuned at those values, right?
Right, and that's where I
for
disagree.
some reason, okay. So if you disagree, let's look closely at the issue and see where specifically my reasoning is wrong, right? So do you agree that there's a mystery as to why those values were selected rather than others, or do you have an explanation for them?
The design,
it's a yes or no question. It's a yes or no question. Do you agree?
Right, and I'm not.
Do you agree that there's a mystery or not?
Right,
Is it
and if I say yes,
why
you're
those
going to take
specific
the
values?
I don't.
Is there a
if I say
mystery or
yes,
not?
you're going to misinterpret it.
We'll get to that later.
Right, you're just giving me a false dilemma on the degree to which there's a mystery.
We can clarify that. So, is there a mystery?
Yes, with respect to.
So you don't have an explanation for why those specific values were selected, right?
What?
Or
those as specific ones? No. In the same way that I don't have.
So there's a mystery there.
In the same way that I don't have a theory for why every single electron is in the position that it is when it's flowing through a wire, and yet I can have a theory that deals with electricity and have an expectation about which direction it's going to flow.
That's fine. Nonetheless, those specific
values
were selected.
Can we actually get to that issue then? It doesn't matter whether there's any determinate theory that dictates every single particular one.
You're not understanding the objection that I'm trying to make, and I'm trying to explain it. Okay, tell me what my objection is.
Your objection is that the specific desires would have to be finely tuned themselves, and an explanation would be warranted in that case, because a particular set.
I didn't say that for the explanation to be warranted, those specific things would have to be explained.
Right, but nonetheless, a specific set of psychophysical laws are chosen, right? And because that specific set are chosen, that the finely tuned desires of the universe or of the designer would have to be explained if you were going to be consistent with my argument.
Well, does the designer have finely tuned desires or not?
No.
He doesn't. So when he selects those desires, what's the reason why when he selects those values, what's the reason why he selects those specific values rather than another? Is there a reason or not?
Right. It would be a reason that's in consideration. There's a certain realm of arbitrariness.
I just asked you, is there a reason or not?
I would love to finish the sentence.
I just want you to answer the question. It's a yes or
no
question.
Right, but you're asking me leading questions that are just yes and no so that you can close the door on what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to say. You can't just pigeonhole me into something because you think you understand what I'm saying. It's going to take me to being able to explain what I'm saying.
You say yes or no, you just allow for clarification after.
Right, but listen, when I answer yes or no, then he goes on this rant on the next point, and then he'll ask me a further yes or no question, and then he'll go on another rant, right? And I'll never actually get my.
It's not a rant. Okay, I'm trying to make a Socratic argument.
Right, but listen. We're human beings. We both understand English, and I think that you, at least in some sense, understand my point.
You don't even understand what an explanation is. You don't understand. I mean, we've asked you numerous times to explain to us what confirmation is, what an explanation is. You don't even understand.
Right, you want me to give a specific definition for these things when I'm just explaining the reasoning, and you're just asking for definitions for I don't know what reason.
I don't understand how you
we could actually address the argument or not.
How can I address the argument when I don't even understand what you're saying? When you're using things like
and
explanation and expectation
and yet you're asking
in
these leading
proprietary
questions.
ways. I'm not asking you a leading question. I'm asking you whether
ask me
there
yes
is
or no
a mystery or not.
over and over.
Is there not a mystery with respect to why God chose the specific values that he chose or not? Take as long as you need to answer the question.
Okay, I said yes, in the same sense that there is a mystery as to why any particular electron might exist in any point of the metal, but no in the same sense that we can, within some kind of range, have an expectation about the electrons in the flow of electrons through an electrical wire.
So the answer is yes, there's a mystery.
Right, and so you'll do that.
Okay,
and
so we agree that there's a
everything out
mystery. We agree that there's a mystery. Now, the question is, right, did God specifically desire those constants rather than others?
No.
He didn't. So what explains why he selected those rather than another set?
In consideration with the general purposes that he had for the universe.
I'm not asking you to tell me that he had considerations that explained it. I'm asking you what specifically the considerations were that explained it.
Right, and I explained some of those about moral conscious agents being embodied and what that would entail.
I mean, the idea is so there's a number of psychophysical laws that are compatible with moral agents, we don't have to have the phenomenology we have, right? So you're not, in that instance, there's no explanation there for why we have the phenomenology we have, but it seems like that's the thing that you're trying to explain by invoking the designer in the first place, is that we have the phenomenology we have.
Right, but I could, say someone goes to the refrigerator and takes out one of 6 cans of Coke, right? And I explain his behavior for grabbing one particular can of Coke by virtue of his thirst, right? It doesn't mean that, you can't tell me why he didn't choose the other one, or the other one, or the other one, or the other one.
But that's an example of coarse.
And
that's an example of coarse tuning. We're talking about fine tuning.
Right.
Well, I'm talking about fine tuning, but it's a range. There is course. There is. I acknowledge that it could have been that I have $21 in my wallet instead of 20.
Now you're saying there's a range. So then I guess the question is.
I've been saying there's a range the entire time.
Well, wait a minute. But if there's a range, then what level in the range is it required that we invoke a fine tuner? Right? Because at what level of granularity, right, is a fine tuning explanation warranted or required?
I mean, you might just think that something like, let's take your electron in the wire example. If someone were to say, well, why is the light turn on, and they appeal to an electrical current, right? And you say, well, why are the electrons in the positions that they are? There is a mystery there. You might not have that.
Right. No, I acknowledge that there is, but I didn't want to answer yes and then let him go on a rant. I wanted to say yes in that sense and not in the sense that he's trying to portray me as. It's just like the example with several cans of Coke in the refrigerator. He might have grabbed cheese or something, but I would explain, I wouldn't have an expectation for him to do that if he was thirsty. Right? There's a range of behaviors that would make sense on that particular desire set, even though I don't know which one it's going to be. in a particular sense.
Look, I agree with that, and that's why I brought up the fact that there are, I mean, presumably a ton of different ways in which there could exist moral agents. You know, you don't need these specific psychophysical laws in order to have moral agents. So that's why I'm saying that that's an instance of what you're talking about there. Is you're saying, well, why is the universe coarsely tuned such that we have psychophysical laws? You know, you're not appealing to the fine tuning because
not coarsely tuned. Like, I mean, if the psychophysical laws were such that you couldn't tell whether or not a human being was in general conscious, like that would, or if you couldn't have predictable consequences for your actions. I mean, there's tons of ways that it could be chaotic to the point that it wouldn't be a moral, like there would be no moral realism there. It wouldn't make any sense.
Right, but I'm saying that those values are like, presumably there's like very large set of, they don't have to be a particular set of predictable consequences. There could be any type set of predictable consequences for your behavior. You know, you don't have to appeal to a specific set. So the question is, what explains why these specific laws are in
right? And I don't know the answer to that question.
But then you have an infinite regress generated. That's the problem, and you keep denying that. You just push the mystery back one level, and then if by parity of reasoning, right, we are beholden by your argument, if your argument were a good argument, to postulate a designer to explain the finely tuned designers of the designer.
No, because then that would also hold true of all human choices, right? Because I can explain a human choice, for example, to do a particular behavior, even though there's multiple different ways to fulfill his desire, he does one particular way, right? And then I could always have an infinite regress for all humans.
You're saying that there's a principled basis by which we can distinguish coarse tuning from fine tuning, and coarse tuned phenomena don't actually need to be explained, right, by postulating a designer, but fine-tuned phenomena do need to be explained by postulating a designer. So the question then is, what is the principal basis by which you distinguish those two?
Even in the traditional fine-tuning argument, there is a particular range of values that the laws could be in order for human lives to exist, right, or for conscious agents to exist. And just because there's a range there and not one particular outcome, that doesn't make it any less fine-tuned.
How is this an answer to my question? I'm asking you the criterion by which you make that distinction.
Right. When you look at the actual range of constants and quantities, which are perfectly compatible with all of the laws of physics, then the small window that there is would be a finely tuned window, even though it's not that's an exactly one outcome window. There's a range of favorable outcomes, but they're extremely unlikely with respect to the range that they could be.
Well, what's the criterion for unlikelihood? I don't understand.
I mean,
you're saying that because there's only a 1 in 6 chance of selecting one beer in a 6-pack, that's a small enough number that we don't require postulating a fine tuner to explain the finely tuned desires of that agent?
Like, I would explain the fact that he gets up and walks and grabs a can of Coke, I don't care which one, by virtue of his belief in desire complex.
But presumably you think there's a level of granularity where fine-tuning explanations are warranted or required, right? And I'm just asking you, what is the cutoff?
Right. I mean, that's it's kind of like a continuum problem. But I mean, I don't think that makes it to where.
But isn't there an infinite range?
I don't know if I would call it, and I don't know if there is an infinite range.
There could be
it would be within the range of what would be coherent.
Why not think that there are an infinity of different possible worlds that God could create?
No, yeah, it depends. Like God's simpliciter could create in the sense that he's capable of creating. He could create an infinite number of worlds.
So
right, but that doesn't. Right, and that doesn't preclude the ability to make a probability assessment. Like there may be an infinite number of ways that reality could diverge from my expectations, but it doesn't. And there may be an infinite number of courses of history that would be perfectly in line with what I expect. That doesn't mean that there isn't a greater infinity that it diverges rather than continues.
Seems like in that instance, there's also an infinite number of worlds that God could choose in which exist moral agents, you know, so but there's still something to be explained about why he chose this world with moral agents as opposed to any other.
Well, moral agents still entail certain facts will be true. Just because there might be an infinite number, say that one of them has only one agent, one has two.
What difference does that make?
Infinity.
What difference does that make? It doesn't get around the problem that we're trying to raise.
It provides conceptual constraints to what it could. Right, whereas laws don't have conceptual constraints.
So what? The point is that it doesn't get around the problem that we're trying to raise, in that you don't seem to have a principled basis as to where you decide to run a fine-tuning argument and where you don't.
Well, I mean, any kind of probabilistic argument where you say, well, this particular outcome warrants some kind of explanation. Like
you're not making a probabilistic argument.
That.
You're not making a probabilistic argument.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not.
Yeah, I am.
No, you're not. Maybe you think you are, but you aren't. But we've already been over this.
Okay,
right?
You can do more than assert that, then.
Yeah, I will explain to you why it is. We asked you, in virtue of what is it the case that your explanation is a better explanation than the meta-law explanation, right? And your response was to say, because it seems more natural, which is not an answer to the question. So in fact, you don't have anything to appeal to make your explanation more probable than the rival explanation.
The fine-tuning itself is a probabilistic assessment of the psychophysical laws. Okay, and then from that, we're invoking that there must be an explanation.
Anything that we don't have an explanation for, right, could be said by the appeal to a principle of sufficient reason to require an explanation. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how improbable or how probable it is, right, if we don't know what explains it.
Well, do you hold the principle of sufficient reason?
It doesn't matter. The point is...
Well, yeah, it does if you're going to invoke it.
Do you hold to the principle of sufficient reason?
No.
Okay, so then you don't have a problem with it not having an explanation then?
I do some things.
Okay,
just because I don't hold the PSR doesn't mean that I have to.
What's the basis by which you decide which phenomena require explanations and which don't?
Intuition, and also that sort of a consistent standard that allows me to.
Look, I'm not interested in you telling me that something is rationally warranted on the basis of intuition. That is worthless to somebody who doesn't share your intuitions about it, right? What I'm asking
I think you do. I think that you couldn't go about your normal daily life without doing it.
What I'm asking you is what rationally compels a person to demand an explanation for some phenomenon and not demand an explanation for another phenomenon. I'm not asking you to say, oh, you know what, in this case, I kind of feel like it needs an explanation, and in this case, it doesn't. I'm asking you for a rational criterion by which we make that distinction.
Well, in the particular instance that we're talking about, if you don't invoke an explanation, then it's perfectly rational to expect, or you would hold it as an open question as to whether or not your psychophysical experiences are going to continue as you expect them to. That we're committed to the idea that they continue, and so we must invoke some kind of explanation for why they would.
No, we could take it as a brute fact that they'll continue.
Right, but then we're looking at ourselves in the universe as something that the universe itself, as a brute fact, takes into consideration.
I'm sorry?
Right, we would be like, right, we recognize that we're fallible, so we undermine the idea that it's some necessary fact of the universe that we experience everything veridically. But nonetheless, we believe it's a brute fact that reality itself takes us into consideration in terms of our individual experiences without invoking anything ontologically that might entail indirectly our own cognitive faculties, but directly as a brute fact that I am going to have intelligible experiences, period. Because that's the nature of the universe as a law that says I am going to have intelligible experiences. I don't think anyone finds that plausible, and I think it's probably
Why wouldn't they find it
empirically
plausible? What's irrational about it?
right. No, it's empirically equivalent, and if someone wanted to be that way and think that the universe is just going to
What is irrational about holding that view?
nothing, in the same way that nothing is irrational about solipsism either.
I think
Right,
there's
I
something
don't think anyone holds
irrational
to it.
about solipsism.
What?
I think there's something irrational about solipsism.
Go ahead.
Well, it's going to take the topic. I don't think it
No, I
matters
wanna know.
now.
If we're talking about the criteria
I don't think
by which we have
solipsism
these,
is coherent.
under dispute right now is that there's some kind of objective criteria that will rationally compel someone to take on a metaphysical position that's beyond some kind of intuition or beyond some kind of
I'm not saying there's anything
basicality or
wrong with
naturality.
having. I'm
No,
not
no, no.
saying
You
there's
said it was
something
irrational. You said there was a reason not to be a solipsist. You said that it was.
I think solipsism is irrational, but I'm not making
Fine.
the claim.
Explain it.
I'm not making the claim that it's irrational to favor a belief.
In virtue of what is solipsism irrational?
I'm not saying that's irrational. I'm just saying that it's not rational either.
Oh, okay. Right. Right. So first you claim it's irrational, and then when someone holds you to the same standard you're holding me, then all of a sudden, I don't know why someone. Maybe I guess I don't believe solipsism is true, but
I think solipsism is irrational.
Fine. Then tell me why.
I don't see what relevance that my argument is.
It is exactly relevant to this discussion because we're talking about the criteria by which we discover it, and if it's empirically equivalent to solipsism.
If I can give an argument to show that a position is self-contradictory, right? It doesn't matter whether it's empirically. It doesn't matter whether it's empirically equivalent.
Tell me how solipsism is contradictory.
What's the relevance of it?
Whatever. You're just going to stronghold yourself into that. No, it's absolutely empirically equivalent, and everybody.
I agree that it's empirically equivalent if we accept that solipsism is logically coherent. I don't.
So,
in virtue of
what is it irrational? In virtue of what is it irrational?
I don't see the relevance to the question.
Whatever. You're giving me an empirically equivalent theory. One of them is irrational and one is not.
If you think the
right?
question is
in
relevant,
virtue of what is one irrational and the other not.
If you think the question is relevant, it should be a simple matter for you to explain why.
I am. I'm saying that you are claiming that my theory is empirically equivalent, and therefore you're asking me, in virtue of what is my theory preferable over the alternative? And so I'm asking you about what you just claimed to be irrational, which is solipsism. It's empirically equivalent to the idea that there are other minds, and yet you can't give me a reason why I should take.
I didn't say I couldn't give you a reason.
You said, okay, well, give me one.
What difference does it make?
I'm sitting here. I'm waiting for you to actually live up to the standard you're holding everyone else to, and you're not going to do it.
What standard do you think I'm holding everyone else to?
That there is something by virtue of which you would reject an empirically equivalent theory.
Wouldn't you reject
irrational?
Wouldn't you reject a theory that you thought was self-contradictory?
Tell me how solipsism is self-contradictory.
I'm not seeing the relevance of that.
There are people on the internet right now who are just struggling with DD, and they're just incapable. And they say, well, I don't have a solution to the problem of hard solipsism, and they fall flat on their face for that, right? And they would love to hear how you think solipsism is self-contradictory.
We can do a whole hangout on that if you like. I don't see why it's relevant to this discussion.
It's relevant because we're talking about the criteria. We're talking about a specific criteria by which you would call something irrational, and it's empirically equivalent.
I'm telling you what my criterion is. My criterion in that case is that one of the hypotheses is self-contradictory, and I can reject it on that basis. Now, of course, I would have to give an argument in order to prove that, right? But the point is, the criterion in question.
You would have to give an argument.
I'd have to give an argument to prove that claim, right?
Right.
But the point
and I'm asking
is
you
that
for
the
you
criterion. But I don't see the relevance of that. The point is that the criterion I don't know what you're laughing about.
I'm laughing because it's so obvious that you don't actually know why it's obvious that it isn't self-contradictory.
It's obvious because you don't know my argument. That's why it's obvious.
No, it's not, because you're not giving it. That's the only argument you have.
Why is that the only explanation for why I'm not giving it? Why is my explanation
because you go on rants and ask me, because when you say when we arrived at this position that okay, these two things are empirically equivalent, and then your next question is in virtue of what?
How are you answering my question?
Right, and I'm applying the same standard to you. And instead of actually giving me an answer, you're saying it's not relevant.
I asked you why my belief that it's not relevant as the explanation for why I'm not giving you the argument right now isn't as good an explanation for why I'm not giving the argument as your claim that I don't have the argument.
Okay, well, I'll withhold judgment until I actually hear your argument for why solipsism is self-contradictory.
It's not relevant right now why solipsism is self-contradictory. What's relevant is that the criterion by which I would reject it is the fact that I claim an incoherent hypothesis, and I claim that I have an argument to show that. Okay? Now,
is it revelation or something?
Do you accept that as a reasonable criterion by which to reject a hypothesis? The fact that it's self-contradictory?
Sure, it's reasonable, but it's not necessary.
Okay, so now we can move on. So
no, we can't. No.
We can't.
I'm not letting you off this issue until you actually tell me what in virtue of what solipsism is irrational.
Why is that relevant? Why is that relevant?
Because I don't believe you.
You can just take it
frankly,
as
I don't think anyone in this hangout believes you.
Who cares?
I think you're just posturing.
Who cares whether you believe me or not? Right? Why is that relevant to the discussion? I keep asking you that.
Well, we're having a discussion, right?
What's being discussed here right now, right, is why your claim that in order to account for the apparent fine-tuning of psychophysical laws, we need to postulate a designer. Now, how is my claim that I have an argument to show that solipsism is incoherent relevant to that issue? What would turn if I were successful at giving that argument, or if I were unsuccessful at giving that argument? What would turn on that?
Move on. Right, we would move on because we would have an actual disagreement.
It doesn't actually affect the issue that's being debated at all. Whether
the reason it affects the discussion is because I don't hold to your standard that you have to have something in virtue of that for something to be a reasonable conclusion. I think.
Well, wait a minute. What do you mean by reasonable?
Or rational?
Do you mean it's warranted? Well, do you mean that it's warranted by reasons?
Yeah, it would be a warranted belief.
But you said you were appealing to intuitions.
Yeah.
How do intuitions provide reasons?
Intuitions simply do. They because they're accurate. We're committed to them.
Are you talking? What do you mean because they're accurate?
That our intuitions are in some sense a general guide to what is reasonable.
You mean that you want to claim? So wait, you want to claim that it's some kind of inductive argument that in the past intuitions have proven reliable and therefore they will likely be.
No, it's a presupposition.
In the future?
It's a presupposition. It's a properly basic belief that every single one in this hangout holds, including the people who are trying to deny that they do it.
If it's a basic belief, then it seems like it doesn't have a justification. I thought the point about basic beliefs was that they don't have justifications.
Right. No. Intuitions being a guide toward finding something reasonable or truthful. That's like saying that your properly basic beliefs or your cognitive faculties themselves are reliable. That's a properly basic belief.
I wasn't asking you that, right? I'm asking you how it is that an intuition provides a justification for a belief.
I mean, the same way that you could say the same thing about sensation. Well, why does a sensation leave you to believe that there's something there providing the sensation out there, or perception?
In the case of perceptions, there's a predictive expectation that
only given a properly basic reliance on or a properly basic belief in the reliability of your cognitive.
I don't know what you mean by properly basic beliefs, but if you
right,
mean,
I mean, you expect
Does
Right.
somebody
It's the
understand?
intuition that a certain kind of explanation is better than another one, and I didn't simply invoke one
What's the
that
criterion you're using that makes it the case that one type of explanation is better than another?
the
On what
criteria.
basis? Not
I don't
the
know a name
criterion
for
that
it.
it's more intuitive. What's the
I don't know a
criterion?
name for it, but I've described it.
Does anybody understand the criterion that Aaron described? Just
Well,
one person?
I thought he was just saying that the reason he accepts it was because it was intuitive to him.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Does
The
anybody else
criterion is intuitive. Okay, I'll explain it again.
Okay.
That it is intuitive that an explanation that, for example, that if you're comparing two types of explanations, one is superior to the other, and I'll explain which ones, how I'm describing these. So it is intuitive that invoking a law that states that a certain series of events will happen in that particular order as a law itself, as a law unto itself, is inferior as an explanation to a kind of law that says under certain conditions, this kind of thing will follow, and then a certain condition happens, and that it entails the series of events, right? That one has more of an explanatory virtue than the other. Because if you just invoke a law that dictates a series of events, there's no real connection between the two. There's nothing you can really do with that explanation. But if you invoke an explanation that doesn't directly just entail a series of events, but entails something that would make it plausible for this chain of events to take place, then that's a superior explanation. It's more intuitive.
Okay.
Right? That's
So
the criterion I'm using.
I didn't follow it, but maybe you can give me an example.
Right. So
where
in
you
the
would
case of
invoke
the
it.
actual, right, in the case of the actual argument, we're contrasting.
No, not in the case of the actual argument. Give me another example where you would invoke this criterion as an explanatory virtue and take me through it step by step how it works.
Okay, so if you find, say you find a series of fossils buried in the ground, different layers, geologic column. And then when you find some at the bottom and find some at the top, instead of invoking a law that would just dictate these kinds of things go at the bottom and these kinds of things go at the top, which is empirically equivalent to a theory which might entail or explain why it is that these kinds of things ended up at the bottom and these kinds of things ended up at the top. One is more intuitive, or one is more, well, just plausible than the other, but they're empirically equivalent. There's nothing in virtue of which.
Wait a minute. But what I'm
might,
asking you in
okay,
virtue
whatever.
of what? I'm asking you in virtue of what is it more plausible?
No,
Saying
you just
it's
asked
more
me for an example.
plausible. Yeah, I asked you for an example, right? But you saying that one is more plausible than the other doesn't explain to me in virtue of what it's more plausible.
Right. I'm just saying one seems like the kind of thing a reasonable person will believe.
But then
and the
you're
other
just
one does not.
appealing to intuitions again.
Yes, I am, and I think that intuitions are properly basic. They're valid. If you don't appeal to them, then you end up a solipsist,
Okay,
or some kind, not even a solipsist, but a skeptic.
for the end, we're not interested in what appears intuitively plausible to you. I don't care about that. That's
Normal
not what
people
I'm
are,
asking
actually.
you. Fine. It's not going to make any difference in the world to somebody who has competing intuitions. That is to say, intuitions that go in the other direction. So what you need to do when you're at a theoretical stalemate like that is give an argument. And so it's not going to help you to give an argument to say, it's intuitive to me, it's plausible to me. If you don't find it so, you're irrational, right? If to say that the other person is irrational to reject the intuition, you need to give an argument.
So does someone need to give an argument against solipsism?
If somebody says solipsism is false, yeah.
Are there arguments against solipsism?
I think so.
Let's say someone undermined your argument against solipsism.
Yeah.
Like someone, like you went in a hangout and you're like, wow, you know what, that's not a great argument, right? Would you then be some kind of just skeptic about the existence of other minds, or would you continue on expecting there to be other minds as a normal human being?
I'm a little confused. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So how would you proceed about your daily life in terms of your belief about the existence of other minds if someone were to undermine your rock solid argument against solipsism?
That's not what I'm taking to be the solipsistic thesis. Just to be clear.
You didn't answer the question.
But I thought you were asking me about solipsism, and I thought that what you were understanding.
No, I'm asking you about your belief. I'm talking about your belief? What would be warranted, or what would be reasonable for you as a human being to believe?
About whether other people have minds?
Yes.
I think that's irrational.
So it's not irrational to just randomly believe something without justification.
No, it's irrational. It's irrational to believe things that are self-contradictory or contradict other beliefs that you hold, or that are justified by appeal to an invalid inference, etc.
So you wouldn't hold someone, you wouldn't say someone is irrational then if they were a solipsist, if they didn't think that it was self-contradictory.
That would be fair to say. Certainly the other minds hypothesis, which I take to be different from the solipsistic thesis, right? I don't think it would be irrational if somebody thought that other people were pea zombies.
All right. Well, it's 1:30. I got to go to bed.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for being patient.
Yeah. All right, later.
I don't know why Philip never joined.